Hello and welcome to your full moon in Gemini forecast. I am your astrologer Cawnawyn Moore, and this is for the full moon in Gemini on December 15th, 2024 at 1:01 a.m. I'm super excited to dive into this chart. There's been a lot of energy, a lot of stuff happening this Sagittarius season, so let's dive right in. So we're looking at the full moon in Gemini. Quick reminder, I use a 0 degrees Aries rising, so that way we don't have to discuss any of the houses because that will depend on your location. So take this chart at 1:01 a.m., convert it to your time zone. This is Pacific time, we're in Seattle, Washington, and you'll get a chart that looks similar to this. The planets will be in different houses, and that will lend some insight into how your community might be feeling this full moon, but I will not be covering the houses. Also, I highly encourage you to take a look at this full moon in a bi-wheel with your own natal chart if you're able, and you can see exactly where the full moon is happening for you in your chart and better understand how it might be affecting you. Of course, I do offer readings and short recorded readings, so if you're really going through a time during the season, I know it's crazy, the holidays are nuts, and you're looking for some astrological insight, feel free to book me at cawnawynmoore.com/readings. So here we are looking at this chart and our full moon, that sun in Sagittarius, 23 degrees, 52 minutes, opposing our 23 degree, 52 minute moon in Gemini. Now, if we can see here, the moon is actually quite close to Jupiter. It just passed its conjunction probably earlier the day before. And so Jupiter's energy is kind of getting carried into this full moon, and Jupiter is opposing the sun right now in its opposite ruler. So the rulership of the sun, right? Sun in Sagittarius, its ruler is Jupiter, and it's standing on the other side of the zodiac, carrying its energy into this moon. So as a reminder, an opposition, this is the aspect we're having. This is what a full moon is, the sun opposing the moon with the earth in the middle. Opposition by aspect is something that we typically see introduced in the form of relationships. Not always, but usually what happens is we're standing in the archetype of either the sun or the moon or any other planet in an opposition, and we're met with, in relationship, the other archetype. And so this opposition is playing out within a relationship. Say if you're standing in the energy of this moon, right? This curious, needing to express and communicate moon in Gemini with this Jupiter expansiveness to it. So there's lots of big ideas, big concepts, lots of information, lots of details, lots of things happening, sounding familiar this time of year, right? That moon might be sitting there being like, okay, I need all the facts, I need all the data, I need to look at this and learn that recipe and do this over here and make sure this is taken care of, and it's just kind of humming along. And then the sun in Sagittarius might come in as a person or as another thing, and you see, oh, this person wants to go clear over here and do the Sagittarius. What about this thing? And Gemini's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on. I was rolling here. But the Gemini Sagittarius axis, which is where this opposition is happening, it's kind of one of the more friendly axes that we have in the zodiac. And I say that because they're both very naturally curious and open signs, explorative signs. So sometimes this Sagittarius can really like amplify that air energy of Gemini and be like, okay, like, let's go learn that thing and let's go do this. But then, what happens is there's sort of this indecisiveness with Gemini where it's like, well, do I go down that way or do I continue doing this thing? And I don't really want to miss out on that, but I was kind of busy over here with this thing. And Sagittarius says, let's go further, let's go bigger, let's go on, let's make it huge, let's make it fun. Are we having fun? The passion behind Sagittarius, wanting to go further than ever before, not wanting to miss any occasion. Do we see why this time of year might be kind of exhausting? Because we're always going to have a Gemini full moon during Sagittarius season. That will always be the lunation because it's opposing the sun. Also, just to note, Jupiter, our ruler of the season, is also in retrograde. We see this in this chart. They denote this by making the degrees and the minutes in red. Okay, so all of these planets, Mars is currently in retrograde, which, oh my gosh, are we feeling? The nodes always move backwards, so they're in red. Mercury's currently in retrograde during this full moon. Guess what, guys? Mercury is the one running this moon over here because Gemini, the moon sign, is run by Mercury. So we have this, actually, Jupiter and Mercury are in what's called mutual reception, and they are both in retrograde. How interesting. Let's dive into that, unpack it a little bit. So when we have two planets in mutual reception, they're in this really beautiful sort of infinity loop because they are in each other's rulership. So they have this like a little bit easier of a communication, even though in this case they're actually in opposition to each other. And what can even happen is Mercury can take on more of its natural role of Gemini, and Jupiter can take on more of its natural role in Sagittarius. So this axis is really being highlighted here. The Sagittarius Gemini axis, as I said, is explorative, is curious, and is really about pursuit of knowledge, right? Gemini is really concerned with taking in all the facts, all the data, wants to investigate, wants to get curious, wants to know more. Really feels like impassioned and excited by the communication of that information. Gemini being the twins, right? There's a need to communicate that with another person and receive that feedback and to learn more through the experience of relating to another. Whereas with Sagittarius, this pursuit goes like well beyond the local. It's about going to different cultures and exploring, how do I fit into this greater world? It's about going to higher forms of education and really discovering philosophy and religion and really expanding the mind, very Jupiterian. So Mercury's operating from that place, Jupiter's operating from this Gemini place, and they're kind of sharing this conversation here. But then we add on to that, they are both also in retrograde. Not only that, look at Mercury is making a trine, a flowing trine here to fellow Mars in fire sign Leo, which is also in retrograde. So much retrograde motion is what is running this show. So does it feel like you're running and not getting anywhere? Does it feel like the world is going backwards and maybe like the treadmill setting is totally wrong and it's like, I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm falling off this thing, right? It also might be cluing us into some past insights, past relationships might be coming up, right? That's a totally typical thing we see with Mercury retrograde, but now it's even emphasized more so. We might really be looking back, looking very reflectively at our own history, perhaps even your own genealogy, your own ancestry. We might be looking at sort of the origins of tradition itself and like where it comes from and what is our role in that, what is our relationship to that, and then maybe some areas where we want to know more and explore more. A lot of this process, because so much of this energy is in retrograde, right, is going to be taking place internally. And so it might be a very private like battle you're going through, or because we have so much Gemini in the chart, right, this is oftentimes indecision, kind of what I was talking about. And oftentimes with Gemini, the way to really make them suffer is to have to only pick one. Not that I'm saying you should shoulder a bunch of responsibilities or a bunch of activities or adventures right now, because it's really a busy time, but I do want to encourage anybody that if you can have an and situation as opposed to an or, right? You can do yes and versus having to pick one. That might be more helpful. If there's a way to balance that or integrate those two energies, very much in opposition, right? Like having to take both archetypes of a planet and figure out how can we work with these together? How can we learn more from that relationship? How can we really get inspired by what other brings to us, right? That's always what an opposition is highlighting, and is definitely the case here. Now we also, because Mars is in retrograde, right, in a fire sign, plus the sun being in fire, plus Mercury being retrograde in fire, this is burnout. This is like, we've been running our engines a lot. We've all gone through a lot of emotions, whether really ecstatic or really depressive, right? I hope everyone is taking care of yourselves out there, because right now burnout is really prevalent, and you may be really struggling with the indecision of what to pursue because there's a finite amount of energy available. And Mars in Leo really wants to be its authentic self, express itself, share the joy, share the magic. But we often forget how much work magic takes to bring, especially when we're the ones with dependent little ones or dependent family members, and we're in charge of making it happen. That can be exhausting. So how can we maybe wheel it back a little bit, allow yourself this space to do sort of more of these internal processes, examine why these things are important truly, and maybe focus in on maybe like letting some of those things go if necessary, right? Even if it's just for this year, giving yourself a little bit of grace, because there's a lot happening. Also, I just want to make mention, so there's a couple other, we're seeing a lot of transits here, right? This is a pretty busy full moon. Of course it is. It's a Gemini full moon. It wouldn't be anything other than that. Lately, we had Venus crossing into Aquarius, right? Which is just even further emphasizing our relationships to friendships, to community, to the organizations and groups that we're a part of. of, and ultimately like what we wish for something much greater than ourselves. Venus is asking us to examine why those things are valuable and what is our value in the greater scope of those things. And she just passed over Pluto earlier this week. So, there might have been even some shadow uncovered with that, some things that maybe we feel a little bit ashamed of or just kind of down about, right? And so Venus, when she's in Aquarius, while she might be very brilliant, sometimes this makes us feel a little lonely and isolated. And it can be hard to shoulder a lot of making the season whatever it's supposed to be, serving the community, if we're feeling lonely in the process. So how can we connect in a deeper way with those people, with not only a system of values that like speaks to what we want to express, but also just speaks to like the importance of this time of year, of the holiday itself, right? I think all these planets are sort of inviting us to go more internal, go deeper, and find the core reasoning behind the why before we progress into making it all happen. And if that means making it simplified, making it easier to swallow, making it just what it needs to be for you this year, that's okay. But I will say though, because we have so much in retrograde motion is when our planets are closest in proximity to Earth. So Mercury is the closest to Earth it gets during the cycle. Mars is, Jupiter is, Uranus is, right? We have all these planets that are big players and running a lot of this chart right here. So their volume is all turned up. Remember that because it's going to feel really hard to want to pull back. And we might really need it. Our body might even demand it of us if we push it too far. But all of this activity feels like, Sagittarius has a really hard time saying no to the experience because it wants to experience it all and find its place in it. And so it may feel really difficult to say no to things or to focus in. But that process is so valuable, right? And I think anybody can agree that like when we take the time to examine the importance of what it is we're pursuing and doing, it really can go a long way to make that whole process, that whole pursuit so much more meaningful. If you have the capacity to consider these things, I highly encourage it. Your mind might already be going in 10,000 places. So where can you maybe carve out a little peace for yourself? I won't say quiet because some people don't find peace in quiet. Sometimes that's rather uncomfortable. Maybe something to consider just as a challenge if that is the case, because it is so busy. But and I feel like I'm just repeating how noisy it is, but that's very indicative of Gemini energy as well. And we've really been experiencing this with Jupiter and Gemini since back in May when it went into Gemini. So have you been feeling that? I'm so curious. I'd love to hear any feedback in the comments, or if you want to shoot me an email, please feel free. So anyway, this is just kind of what's jumping out at me with this chart today. I hope this was helpful. I hope you're learning too. The whole reason I want to do it this way is because I'd like to show sort of how I read the chart, what I'm picking out. And this can act as an instructional video on how to read charts as well as a forecast for people. So if you want to sit back and listen to the forecast, that's great. But if you're trying to learn to read charts, anything I can do to further help with that, I'm happy to do so and would love to know how I can do that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure that you always check out my seasonal forecast on Bonfire Babble podcast. I come out with every astrological season, and we have the 2025 forecast coming very soon. Super excited to bring that. Also, I do have one more class this year, which is my 2025 class. So if you're local to the Tacoma, Washington area, I'd love to see you. We're doing lots of chart readings for that whole class. I'm giving forecasts on the whole year. Oh my goodness, 2025 is going to be crazy. So if you're available, please come. And if you're not in the local area or you're not available, I will be making the lecture portion of that class available. Lastly, I just want to mention my newest album is coming very, very soon. It will be out on the 19th of December. It's called Kapsura, and it is a Greek-inspired music ritual album. So all my fellow witches out there, if you're looking for just some underscore to have behind you while you're doing your magic, that is what these albums, these ritual albums are all about. I already have one out called Ushabti, and it's very Egyptian inspired. Now we're going to Greece. So really excited to bring that for you for the holidays, and I hope that you are well out there. I'm wishing you all the best this season. Blessed winter solstice to you. I will have a winter solstice astrology message coming soon, and may you manifest a life full of divine purpose and glory, for you are worthy and you are free. Blessed be.